In a world obsessed with perfection, the raw, unfiltered truth is a rare and powerful thing. Kiran's story isn't polished or sanitized. It's a real account of addiction and recovery, told exactly as it happened. This is an invitation to witness the reality, to learn, and to find hope in honest storytelling. Darkness rarely arrives all at once. It creeps in, disguised as small, harmless choices. For Kiran, it started in 2021 as a shy newcomer desperate to fit in. Peer pressure didn't force him. It simply normalized what once seemed unthinkable. One "just try it" moment set off a chain reaction that would change everything. Kiran's shyness made him feel invisible, and his friends offered a shortcut, a substance that promised instant confidence. The lure wasn't chaos, it was connection, a chance to finally belong. The promise of courage was irresistible, and his insecurities made him the perfect target. Trying it felt less like surrender, more like a desperate attempt to break free. Kiran's struggle was silent. Shyness, a lingering injury, and the pressure to be normal weighed him down. Marijuana was pitched as a cure, not a vice, a way to finally feel powerful. The first high delivered exactly what he craved: confidence, ease, and a sense of belonging. That initial success was the most dangerous deception of all. For Kiran, marijuana became a calculated tool, a crutch for every social situation. It worked at first, silencing his anxiety and giving him borrowed confidence. But the more he relied on it, the less he believed in himself. What began as freedom quickly became a prison he never saw coming. The transition from strategic use to habitual need is, well, often subtle, a slow creep that goes unnoticed until it's just too late. What began as a tool for specific situations gradually became a constant companion. That feeling of borrowed confidence was so effective, so liberating, that my desire to keep it just grew stronger with each use. The periods of clarity, when my natural shyness came back, started to feel more and more uncomfortable. I actually started to prefer the version of myself that existed under the influence. And that, right there, was the insidious path from use to addiction. The marijuana, my first chain, was slowly tightening its grip, pretending to be a friend while quietly forging the links of dependence. At this stage, my world of substance use was limited to just one thing. Crystal meth wasn't even on the horizon yet. It was like this unknown entity, a darkness I hadn't even thought about. My focus was on navigating my present reality, which wasn't just about my social life, it was also about my future. As a student with some knowledge in the IT field, I was thinking about my career, about how I could start earning a living. This practical ambition, this desire for financial independence, would ironically become the gateway to a much more dangerous phase of my addiction. The need to succeed professionally would soon collide with my growing dependency. So, I turned to the same friends who had introduced me to marijuana, asking for advice on how to make money. Their suggestion was to get involved in internet stuff, which was just a vague term for online work that required long hours and intense focus. The main challenge with this work was the need to stay awake, often through the night, to match different time zones or meet crazy deadlines. To fight fatigue and stay sharp, my friends had another solution. They were already taking things to help them stay awake, to sharpen their senses and push through the natural limits of the human body. The need to be alert introduced a new justification for using substances. This new requirement, the need to stay awake for work, created the perfect opening for something stronger. The laid-back confidence from marijuana just wasn't enough to fuel those all-night work sessions. They needed something to spice up their vibes, something with more energy, more power. And it was in this context that a friend brought up the idea of crystal meth. It wasn't presented as a dangerous narcotic, but as a productivity tool, an enhancer that would let us work harder and longer. The transition was shockingly fast. Within just 3 months of starting this new venture, meth entered the picture, and the nature of my addiction was about to change in a way I could never have expected. The introduction of crystal meth was, honestly, framed not as a leap into some dangerous new territory, but as a logical next step. For someone like me, who had already found a solution for social anxiety in marijuana, the idea of a new substance to solve a new problem seemed, well, perfectly reasonable. Meth was pitched as an upgrade, a top-up to the confidence I'd already discovered. My friends saw my existing habit as proof that I was open to chemical solutions, which, made me an easy target for their next experiment. The groundwork had already been laid. Since I already liked the feeling that one drug gave me, it was a simple and, honestly, tragically effective sales pitch to suggest another, even more potent one. The door to a much darker room was already ajar. The social setting played a big role too. When meth first showed up, it was during our shared time together, moments filled with music, camaraderie, and the pursuit of a collective vibe. We would gather to work on our online ventures, and the atmosphere was all about collaboration and shared experience. One friend, who was already using meth, became the center of our curiosity. He was the pioneer, the one who had already stepped into this new world. His experience was presented as something desirable, a new level of feeling that the rest of us were missing out on. It wasn't some solitary act of desperation. It was a group activity, which kind of cloaked the danger in a feeling of normalcy and shared adventure. The question was inevitable. My friends, seeing this new substance, were curious. "How is this stuff?" they asked. The response was, honestly, intoxicatingly positive. "Man, it's a different feeling altogether," the friend explained, promising us an experience we would all enjoy. That kind of personal testimony from a trusted peer is way more powerful than any abstract warning. It was a direct endorsement, a guarantee of pleasure from someone right there in our circle. There was no mention of the risks, no hint of the devastating consequences waiting just out of sight. The focus was only on the immediate reward, the promised joy, and the shared experience of discovering something new together. The decision to try it was a collective one. There were 4 of us in total, and all 4 decided to go for it. We were a unit, moving together into this unknown territory. We weren't just trying a drug, we were strengthening our bond through a shared transgression. That sense of unity gave us a false sense of security, like the shared nature of the act somehow made it less dangerous. We were all in it together, and that collective leap of faith was the final push I needed. The allure of a new feeling, vouched for by a friend and sanctioned by the group, was just too strong to resist. The downward spiral was about to accelerate. From their perspective, the experiment was a resounding success. The crystal meth delivered an immediate and overwhelming rush, a wave of euphoria that honestly was unlike anything they had ever experienced before. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside their brains, boosting their dopamine levels to an extraordinary degree. Everything felt more intense, their sensitivity was heightened, the world seemed more vibrant, and this, profound sense of joy just enveloped them completely. In that first moment, they felt invincible, almost as if they were standing on top of the world, masters of their own universe. This intense, chemically induced happiness was so powerful that it blinded them to the destructive reality of what they were actually consuming. The substance had this really insidious quality. I would describe it as having a spirit of its own, one that latches onto you from the very first use. The addiction wasn't some slow slide, it was an instant capture. Once you take it, you're hooked. This immediate and powerful dependency, it changed everything about their lives. What started as a tool to help them stay awake for online work quickly became the main event. The original purpose, it was forgotten, just cast aside for something new. They even started calling their sessions cruise, a word that, for them, meant pure enjoyment, a kind of detached, carefree pursuit of pleasure. This is such a critical turning point in any addict's journey. That moment when the substance stops being a means to an end and just becomes the end itself. The meth had the power to completely shift their mindset from their original plans. Once it entered their system, their ambitions of working and earning money just dissolved, replaced by this all-consuming desire to keep the high going, to chase that feeling of manufactured happiness. The drug was no longer serving their goals, it was creating new ones. It started pulling them away from their responsibilities, their ambitions, and, ultimately, from their true selves. The cruise was leading them directly into a storm. The false joy it gave came at a terrible cost, one they just couldn't see yet. It was creating this illusion of control and happiness while, underneath, It was dismantling the very foundations of their lives. They really believed they'd found a secret key to unending pleasure, a way to live in this constant state of bliss. But honestly, that bliss was just a mirage, shimmering beautifully in the distance while the ground beneath their feet was crumbling away. They were so caught up in the feeling that they didn't notice the slow, steady destruction happening within. They felt like they were on top of the world, totally unaware that the world they were standing on was starting to disappear. The erosion of self, it's a slow, almost imperceptible process. As the addiction took a deeper hold, my true personality, my normal self, just started to decrease. I began losing touch with the core of who I was. The things I used to enjoy, the hobbies and interests that once defined me, they started to lose their appeal. I found myself drifting away from activities that had brought me genuine joy before. But this wasn't some sudden, dramatic change that happened overnight. It was more like a gradual fading, a slow retreat from my own life that was so subtle, I didn't even realize it was happening. The drug was quietly rewriting my identity, one neuron at a time. The most frightening part of this transformation was my own lack of awareness. While I was changing on such a fundamental level, I still believed I was the same person. The addiction created a powerful kind of denial, a blind spot that kept me from seeing my own deterioration. It was the people on the outside, the ones who knew me before, who could see the shift. They would look at me and say, "I've known you for a long time, and this is not you." But I wouldn't, or maybe couldn't agree. I'd just dismiss their concerns, convinced I was still in control, still my normal self. It was like I was a passenger in my own body, and someone else was starting to take the wheel. This internal decay eventually started showing up in my relationships. It got to a point where I couldn't even relate to my own family. They'd always known me as a quiet person, so my withdrawal wasn't immediately alarming. When I came home and kept to myself, they just thought it was my usual reserved nature. They had no idea about the immense battle I was fighting inside, the demons I was wrestling with in silence. I was physically there, but emotionally and spiritually absent. My quietness wasn't just shyness anymore. It was a symptom of a deep and terrifying isolation caused by the addiction. This isolation was made even worse by the psychological effects of the drug. I wasn't just battling my own thoughts anymore. I was starting to battle voices that weren't mine. The normal world began to warp and twist into something else. The hallucinations started. I began seeing things that weren't there, thinking of myself as some kind of prophet or seer, because my mind was being flooded with these wild, drug-induced visions. This wasn't just a casual habit or a search for confidence anymore. This was core addiction. The phase where the substance takes you so far from reality that you start to lose your mind, hearing voices and losing touch with the world as it truly is. The work that had once been the reason for using meth, the online store, the crypto trading, all of that became a casualty of the addiction itself. The very substance I took to enhance my focus started to systematically destroy my cognitive abilities. One of the most alarming effects for me was the profound memory loss. I would just forget things, important details and conversations, like my mind was a sieve, unable to hold on to new information. Thoughts would slip away before they could even fully form, leaving me in this constant state of mental fog. The tool I had picked up to sharpen my mind for work was now making it impossible to do even the simplest tasks, betraying its original promise with cruel irony. This mental decline was matched by a shocking physical deterioration. The drug started to drain the life out of my body, leaving me feeling weak and frail. I describe it as a process of being dried up from the inside out, becoming lame and lethargic. This physical decay brought along a bunch of other symptoms that felt like severe illness. Frequent pounding headaches became my constant companion, along with these persistent feelings of sickness, kind of like malaria or typhoid. My whole body system was in revolt, thrown into chaos by the chemical poison I was regularly putting into it. My health was collapsing, but the addiction's grip was just too strong for me to see it clearly. The physical changes were obvious to anyone who looked at me. My skin became pale, my body gaunt, as the meth continued its relentless process of drying me up from within. Yet in one of the most insidious tricks of addiction, I remained oblivious to my own transformation. I just couldn't see the hollowed-out version of myself that was emerging. It was always the people around me, those on the outside looking in, who noticed the frightening changes. They would approach me with concern, saying, "Hey, you are changing. This isn't you. What is happening?" Their words were meant to be a lifeline, a mirror to show me the truth of my condition. But I just couldn't accept what they were seeing. Trapped within my own perception, I would push back against their observations, insisting that nothing was wrong. No, I'm still the same person, I'd argue, genuinely believing it. The drug created a powerful delusion, a fortress of denial that was almost impossible to break through. I was living inside a lie, convinced of my own normalcy while my body and mind were wasting away. I was the last person to know, the last to see the ghost I was becoming, because the addiction was designed to keep me blind. The circle of his life began to shrink, constricting around the addiction until it was the only thing left. He stopped calling people, not just casual acquaintances, but everyone who was part of his old life. His family, his siblings, they all faded into the background as the drug reshaped his world. The people he now considered his true family were the ones he used with, the small group of friends who shared his habit. The meth worked on his mind, planting a dangerous and isolating idea that these were his people, his real family. The substance created its own tribe and demanded absolute loyalty, severing all other connections. This insidious belief system took root and grew, creating a deep chasm between him and the people who genuinely cared for him. The drug whispered a new rule into his consciousness. Anyone who doesn't indulge is not part of you. They are outsiders, strangers who cannot possibly understand. This toxic logic made it easy to disengage. He automatically pulled away from his biological family, losing any desire to speak with them or connect with them on any level. The only people he wanted to interact with were the ones who saw the world through the same distorted chemical lens. His addiction had become his entire social identity. Meanwhile, his real family was in agony. His mother, sensing that something was deeply wrong, was beside herself with worry. She would call him, her voice filled with tears, begging for a connection that was no longer there. She reached out to his siblings, and they too began to call, their voices joining a chorus of concern that he refused to hear. Their love and fear were a distant noise, muffled by the loud, insistent reality of the addiction. He was lost to them, adrift in a world they couldn't enter, and their helplessness was a source of profound pain for everyone who loved the person he used to be. At one point, his younger brother came to visit him at school, a desperate attempt to bridge the growing gap. Even then, the full extent of the problem remained hidden. His brother didn't notice the signs of drug use, but he did notice a significant change in Kieran's demeanor and mood. He could see that the light in his brother's eyes had dimmed. "Kieran, what is wrong?" he asked gently. "Are you sure you are okay?" Confronted with this direct, loving concern, Kieran offered a partial truth. He admitted he was passing through a period of depression, but carefully concealed the reason why, masking the addiction with a more socially acceptable struggle. He told his brother that he didn't know the cause of his depression, that he had just woken up one morning and the feelings were there. It was a carefully constructed lie designed to end the conversation and preserve his secret. The deception worked, temporarily placating his brother's concerns, but it did nothing to change the underlying reality. The addiction was not a feeling he could wake up from. It had become the central, organizing principle of his existence. As long as there was money, as long as the income from their online activities continued to flow, the urge to get the meth was an unstoppable force. It had to be acquired no matter what. The financial dependency of the habit was absolute. When his own money ran out, his new family, the friends he used with, would step in and provide. This created a powerful codependent ecosystem where the supply was always available. There was no financial rock bottom to hit. No moment of desperation that might force a change because they propped each other up. They were a closed loop, fueling each other's habits and ensuring that the cruise never had to end. This mutual support, which felt like friendship, was actually the architecture of their shared prison, reinforcing the bars and locking the doors from the inside. Yet, even in the depths of this darkness, a small part of his true self remained. Kieran explains that, at certain points, a flicker of self-consciousness would return. He was aware in fleeting moments that he was battling something monstrous. Whenever he noticed his funds were about to run out, a primal sense of self-preservation would kick in, and he would automatically withdraw from his friends for a little while. In these brief periods of solitude and clarity, he would regain a piece of himself. He would look at his life and think, "This thing I'm doing, this is not who I am." It was a moment of profound recognition, a glimpse of the person he was before the addiction. This ability to have moments of recollection, to briefly step outside the addiction and see it for what it was, is not something everyone experiences. Kieran believes it only happens to people who are inherently strong, who possess a resilient core that the drug cannot completely extinguish. Many others are swept away entirely, never finding that moment of conscious clarity. For him, these flashes of his former self were both a blessing and a curse. They were a painful reminder of how far he had fallen, but they were also the seeds of his eventual return. In those moments, he would simply pause, leave the group, and breathe, clinging to the fading memory of who he was supposed to be. Those fleeting moments of clarity, the brief interludes where Kieran recognized the stranger he was becoming, were lifelines. But they were not enough to pull him back to shore. The tide of addiction was too strong, and it always dragged him back under. The final definitive break did not come from a quiet moment of personal reflection. It came from a sudden, violent and terrifying event that shattered the illusion of the cruise forever. The moment he stopped, truly and automatically, was during his HND program. It was a night that began like any other, with him and his friends gathered together, indulging in their usual ritual of meth and marijuana. The familiar haze filled the room, a cocktail of different substances creating a predictable vibe. They were deep into their session when the familiar atmosphere was punctured by a sudden, jarring change. It was late, somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, the dead of night when the world outside was asleep. One of his friends abruptly stood up, his eyes wide with a strange intensity, and screamed, "I'm going home." The statement was bizarre and nonsensical. The apartment they were in was his own. He was already home. The absurdity of it hung in the air, a stark and confusing declaration that made no logical sense. At first, the others tried to brush it off as part of the high, just another strange moment in their chemically fueled world. They thought it was just a vibe, a normal side effect of the cocktail of substances they had consumed. But the feeling quickly shifted from strange to deeply unsettling. The friend, clad only in his boxer shorts, began walking purposefully towards the door, his intention to leave his own home unwavering. His movements were frantic, his eyes darting around the room as if seeing things they couldn't. Kieran and the others watched, a cold knot of apprehension tightening in their stomachs. "What is wrong?" they whispered to each other. "What is wrong with this guy now?" The usual sense of camaraderie and shared euphoria evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread and confusion. The situation escalated rapidly. It was no longer just a strange comment or an odd impulse. The friend began shouting incoherently, his voice filled with a raw, primal terror. Then came the destruction. He started smashing his own belongings, his television, his furniture, anything he could get his hands on. The sound of breaking glass and splintering wood echoed through the small apartment. It was in that moment of violent chaos that the final veil was torn away for Kieran. He realized with chilling certainty that this was not ordinary, this was not a vibe. This was something else entirely. Something had gone terribly, irrevocably wrong. The scene, descended into pure chaos. The friend was completely lost to them, just consumed by a powerful psychosis that had, severed his connection to reality. Kieran and his other friends, with their own minds clouded by the substances they had taken, were thrown into a state of panicked confusion. Their first instinct was to try and physically restrain him, to hold him down and stop him from hurting himself or destroying everything around him. They were all confused, honestly, just operating on pure adrenaline and fear. They had no idea what to do. One of them, in a desperate and misguided attempt to help, tried to give him Gary to eat, thinking maybe this local remedy could sober him up. But the problem was far beyond what a simple foodstuff could solve. He was completely uncontrollable. The strength he displayed was immense, fueled by the drug and his own terror. He fought against their grip, continuing to thrash and misbehave even as they held him down. He had, in every sense of the word, lost his mind. In the midst of this struggle, as he watched his friend unravel before his eyes, Kieran was overcome by a wave of emotion. He sat down on the floor, the sounds of shouting and destruction swirling around him, and he began to cry. The tears came from a place he didn't even understand. It wasn't just fear or sadness for his friend. It was a deeper, more profound grief that had been building inside him for months. As he wept, something inside him broke open. The carefully constructed walls of denial just crumbled, and a flood of memories rushed in. He remembered his family, his mother's tearful voice on the phone, his siblings, his relatives. He saw their faces, felt their love, and understood the pain he had caused them. Flashbacks of his old life, of the person he used to be before the drugs, flickered through his mind. He remembered the things he used to do, the simple joys he had abandoned, the potential he was squandering. The stark contrast between the man he was and the man he had become was laid bare in the most brutal way imaginable. In that moment of absolute brokenness, surrounded by the wreckage of his friend's mind and apartment, he looked up and uttered a silent, desperate prayer. "God, I messed up," he thought, the words a raw and honest confession. "If you can just help me out of this, I will never indulge in this again." It was a bargain made at rock bottom, a plea for divine intervention from a soul that had finally acknowledged it was lost. He saw his friend's terrifying breakdown not just as a tragedy, but as a horrifying glimpse into his own potential future. It was a mirror showing him the end of the path he was on, and he knew he had to get off. The struggle continued for hours. We wrestled with our friend, just trying to keep him safe as his mind raged, until the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows around 6 in the morning. Exhausted and emotionally shattered, we made a plan. We just couldn't handle this alone anymore. So we decided to leave, all except for one person who would stay behind to manage the situation. The remaining friend made the difficult call to the parents, carefully explaining that their son had started misbehaving, but leaving out the crucial detail of what had truly caused the psychotic break. The parents were told to come, without knowing the full, terrifying truth of the night's events. Soon after, the family arrived. It was the friend's mother, accompanied by 3 other young men, maybe brothers or relatives. They entered the scene of devastation, their faces etched with shock and concern. They saw their son, disoriented and broken, and without needing a full explanation, they just knew he needed help. They gently but firmly took charge, picking him up and preparing to take him away. It was clear where he was headed. He was being taken to a rehabilitation facility. For me, watching my friend being led away by his family was the final, sobering image of a night that had changed everything. The cruise was officially over. The trauma of the incident settled deep into my soul. The immediate aftermath wasn't one of relief, but of profound sickness. Less than 2 days after my friend's breakdown, I fell ill myself. The weight of the experience, the constant overthinking, the sheer horror of what I had witnessed, it all took a severe toll on my body and mind. Sleep became impossible. My thoughts raced constantly, replaying the events of that night over and over. I felt utterly helpless, trapped in a state of high alert and deep anxiety. My appetite vanished. The simple act of eating food became a monumental problem, and my body, already weakened by substance abuse, just began to shut down. I was lucky, though, not to be alone. My girlfriend was with me during this period, and as my condition worsened, she became frightened. Seeing me so sick and unresponsive, she made a crucial decision and called my brother for help. When my brother arrived and saw the state I was in, he acted immediately. We rushed to the hospital, seeking professional medical help for a sickness that was born from both the body and the mind. The breaking point had finally led to a breaking down, a complete physical and emotional collapse that would force the truth into the light. The secret was about to come out. Lying in the sterile hospital bed, the familiar world of my addiction felt a million miles away. The chaos of my friend's breakdown, followed by my own body's collapse, had stripped away every layer of denial. The doctor's words hung in the air, a clinical confirmation of a truth I had long hidden from everyone, including myself. The doctor confirmed that something was draining my body of its essential fluids, its blood and water, causing the pale, gaunt appearance and the overwhelming sickness. The drug was literally consuming me from the inside out, making me a ghost of my former self. The medical evidence was undeniable, a scientific verdict on my secret self-destruction. The doctor, with the practiced eye of someone who has seen this story before, asked the direct question, "Are you taking anything?" Even then, in the face of medical proof, the instinct to lie was strong. "No," I said, the denial automatic, a reflex honed by months of hiding. But the lie was weak, transparent. The doctor knew. His calm, knowing gaze told me that the charade was over. He began prescribing treatments, administering drugs to counteract the poison. But the unspoken truth remained between us. The real cure would have to come from me, from a confession that was long overdue. The turning point came when my brother, his face etched with worry, sat by my bedside. The hospital room became a sanctuary, a space safe enough for the truth. It was then that my brother called home, and the gravity of the situation finally broke through my last defenses. I confided in my brother completely, telling him everything. The words just poured out of me, a torrent of confession about the marijuana, the meth, the lies, the slow fade of my own soul. I laid the entire ugly story bare, holding nothing back. I explained what I was taking, why I started, and the dark place it had led me to. I was convinced I was going to die. This wasn't a cry for help, it was a last confession. Lying there, weak and terrified, I felt the need to clear my conscience, to make sure my family knew the truth in case the worst happened. I didn't want them to think someone else was to blame, that some external force had done this to me. I needed them to know it was my own fault, the result of my own choices. The confession was punctuated by tears. My brother cried and I cried with him, a shared grief for the brother, the son, the person who had been lost along the way. The hospital room was filled with the sound of our shared sorrow. In the middle of this emotional outpouring, the doctor returned, bringing with him a sense of calm authority. After reviewing the tests and observing my state, he delivered his final diagnosis. He reassured us that there was nothing critically wrong with me, no fatal disease that couldn't be overcome. The message was simple but profound. I was not dying, but I had to stop what I was doing. I had to stop taking the substance that was draining my blood and water. The path to recovery was clear. It wasn't about a magic cure, it was about making a choice to live. This news, coupled with the relief of my confession, was a turning point. I remained in the hospital for a full week. During that time, the medical staff worked to flush the toxins from my system. The IV drips, the medication, and the enforced rest began the slow process of physical healing. My body, free from the constant chemical assault, began to find its equilibrium again. I was slowly, painstakingly, coming back to normal. The fog in my mind began to lift, and with each passing day, I felt a little more like myself. The hospital stay was a forced reset, a necessary pause that saved my life. As my own health improved, my thoughts turned to my friend, the catalyst for this entire crisis. With a sense of trepidation, I called my friend's sister to ask for an update. The news I received was a second miracle. She confirmed that her brother was normal again. He was okay. The rehabilitation was working, and he had been pulled back from the brink of insanity. A wave of immense gratitude washed over me. I thanked God for everything, for my own second chance, and for the recovery of my friend. It felt like we had both stared into the abyss and, by some grace, had been allowed to step back. After a week of intensive care, the flushing of my system was complete. The drugs and the treatment had done their work. I was discharged from the hospital, physically weak but mentally clearer than I had been in a long time. I had been brought to the lowest point of my life, a place of near death and utter despair, but I had emerged from it with a newfound clarity. I had confessed my secret, faced my demons, and survived. The journey was far from over, but the first and most difficult steps toward recovery had been taken. I was going home, not as the person who had entered the hospital, but as someone ready to start again. The path out of addiction is built upon a foundation of difficult truths, and the very first cornerstone is acceptance. Before any healing can begin, you have to look at your life, at the choices you've made, and admit that what you are doing is wrong. This is the most crucial and, honestly, often the most challenging step. For me, this acceptance didn't come in a quiet moment of reflection, but in the chaos of a hospital room, faced with my own mortality. It's only from this place of raw honesty that a person can begin to rebuild. Hiding the problem, pretending it doesn't exist, only strengthens the addiction's hold. It thrives in silence and secrecy, and speaking the truth is the first act of defiance against it. Once acceptance is achieved, the next essential step is to reach out and talk to someone. The burden of addiction is just too heavy for one person to carry alone. Sharing that burden, airing it out with a trusted individual, immediately lessens its power. As the old saying goes, a problem shared is a problem half solved. When I finally confessed everything to my brother, the release was immediate and profound. It was the moment the healing truly began. This must be done with care, of course. The confidant has to be a trusted person, someone who will listen with empathy and without judgment. Finding that safe harbor is critical, as it provides the anchor needed to weather the storm of recovery. It's also vital for those on the outside to understand how to respond to such a confession. The common reaction of shouting, shaming, or expressing anger is not only unhelpful, but actively damaging. It pushes the person struggling deeper into their isolation and reinforces the feeling that no one understands. The correct approach, the only approach that works, is one of calmness and love. You have to have a heart-to-heart discussion, seeking to understand the person, not just the addiction. Violence and condemnation do not work. You have to be calm, patient, and lead with compassion, creating an environment where the person feels safe enough to be vulnerable and accept the help being offered. Ultimately, the most powerful medicine for addiction is love. People battling dependency are often the ones who need love the most, because they're lost in a world of self-loathing and isolation. They feel unworthy, unlovable, and completely alone. The consistent, unconditional love of family and friends is what can slowly guide them back. It helps them rediscover their sense of belonging, to feel that they are worth fighting for. For me, this love, combined with my own will to change, was the catalyst for my new life. Today, I'm a graduate, successful in my work and at peace. My story, and the recovery of all my friends, stands as a powerful testament that no matter how deep the darkness, the light of acceptance, connection, and love can always lead the way back home.